How's going guys, welcome to the channel. In this video we are gonna see, what if Naruto was the shinobi of the sun god Harem? Part 1. Huge shout out to TACHYON99 for this story. If you wants to see awesome fanfiction like this, don't forget to subscribe. Now let's get into the video. It was currently close to midnight in the village of Konohagakure, and everything was silent. People were at home sleeping in their beds, while the village shinobi in Kunoichi were either patrolling one of the village gates or sleeping in their homes. However, there appeared to be one person who wasn't sleeping, and we find them moving through the streets and alleyways. The small figure looked around before ducking behind a trash can when they spotted some shinobi patrolling the area before leaving. Once they were gone, the small figure looked before looking both ways and ran to the nearby store. Upon reaching the door, the figure took out some lockpicks before they unlocked the door. They quickly made their way inside before closing the door back up. Finally, within the safety of the store, they were suddenly engulfed in a small puff of smoke before it dissipated, revealing a young blonde child of 11 or 12 years old. The child, without needing to think, runs through the store, grabbing some sealing scrolls used by shinobi for sealing objects, and begins sealing fruit from apples, melons, oranges, which was also his favorite color, and several others along with vegetables, ramen noodles, fish, and other assortments of food. Once he got the food, the child began sealing several dozen cases of bottled water, before also sealing pots, pans, and cooking utensils. As he is beginning to leave, he spots a black cloak with an outfit that just screamed, "Wear me," to the child. It consisted of a burnt orange colored jacket with a hood that had black fur around the hood, cuffs, and hem of the jacket. There were black stripes on the sleeves, as well as a pair of black pants and sandals. Quickly swiping the outfit, he changes into it, before donning the black cloak around himself. With his excursion complete, he leaves into the night, disappearing from the village without a sound. -1 month later. It was eerily calm on this day in the village, but if one were to pay close attention, they would realize everyone seemed to not be in the happiest of moods. People who were smiling were clearly faking it as could be seen, while everyone seemed to just not be as full of life. Then, in a small residence near the summit of the village's national monument called the Hokage Monument, a red-haired woman could be found, seething in rage at a blonde-haired man who looked eerily similar to the child who left. These were the Yondaime Hokage, Minato Namikaze and his wife, Kushina Uzumaki. "Damn it Minato, this is your son." Kushina yelled out in anger and frustration as tears were streaming down her face. "If it was Mito, you'd be tearing the village apart to find her in a heartbeat, but since it's Naruto, you could care less if he was found in Iwa by Inoki." Minato merely scowled and said, "Now listen closely Kushina, I love Naruto as much as I do Mito, but I can't show more affection for one missing child." Kushina glared at him to the point that it looked like she was trying to kill him with just her glare alone. Minato then said, "The needs of the many outweigh the few. You bastard." Kushina growled out in anger and sorrow, "This is our son, our flesh and blood Minato, or did you forget?" She questioned, "And besides, he has the 9 tails chakra sealed inside his body, do you know how many people would love to get their hands on something that powerful? He might not be a full-fledged Jinchuriki like Mito is, but he can still call on the chakra of the beast inside," she said. Minato shook his head, "I'm sorry Kushina, but there is nothing I can do," he told her as he vanished in a yellow flash. Kushina glowered at where her husband once stood. "No, you're right. There is nothing you can do. Because we're done," she told herself. It was a considerably good thing her daughter was at the academy at the moment, because if she were home, she would be upset beyond words. As Naruto's twin sister, they shared a close bond, and seeing as Mito wasn't crying in distress, he was alright. She sighed deeply, "Naruto, wherever you are, I hope you're alright," she told herself before she left in order to go get some papers filled out and signed by her no-good soon-to-be ex-husband. Meanwhile, in an underground tavern built into a mountain, a man of 25 could be found wearing a simple pair of glasses with a manly mustache staring at a wall in silence. He was wearing what appeared to be a bartender's outfit with a baggy white button-up shirt, green vest and red bow tie. He was also wearing a pair of green pants and brown shoes. On the wall he was staring at was what appeared to be a single-handed battle axe that looked to be made of gold. He sighed before turning back around and drawing some glass cups as he remembered the events that took place which led to his current predicament from 7 years ago. He didn't like how he and the others were framed for killing Grand Holy Knight Zaratras to the point where they had to flee, but he accepted it as yet another day in his life. He then sighed to himself before looking out the window at the night sky and said, "I wonder how Mom and Mito are after all these years." He then shook his head before continuing to dry the dishes and placing them back where they belong. He then began to think back to how he got to where he was now. Flashback. The currently 13-year-old Naruto can be found walking across the country of Britannia after paying a boatman for the trip and waiting almost 6 months. He was currently wearing a loose white shirt and baggy black pants with brown shoes and a bag thrown over his shoulder. He was just walking along the road when he noticed a pair of cloaked people walking in the direction he had just come from. He saw both of their bags containing their money and then looked at his little bag and figured they wouldn't mind if they have that much money. So, keeping his pace, he subtly cut their bags of money, quickly collected a few coins and kept walking, thinking he got away with it until he sensed an attack heading his way and dodged. He looked to see what had attacked him and saw what looked to be a strange, small orb. He looked up and came face to face with a sword that, judging by the arm holding the sword, is a man. The other person began to move over towards him, and just as he was about to perform a kawarimi, a breeze of wind blew the hood of the one in front of him off just enough for him to see a pair of gold eyes. He then heard the person say, "Time shift," with a voice that clearly proved this was a woman. Then there was a bright flash of light and everything was gone. The woman looked to her fellow traveler and nodded her head. "It is done, Lion Sin of Pride has been found," she said to the man. "Well, he might not be the one we were originally after, but his heart is in the right place." He responded before he chuckled, "If you could look past the sheer amount of pride he has around him, he'd certainly make one hell of a holy knight," he stated. The woman nodded her head. "Indeed, now all we have to do is wait and he will reappear to bring an end to this, as well as his own land's chaos," she responded as they suddenly grew a pair of wings and vanished in flashes of light. -25 years prior. Naruto felt himself hit the ground with a thud before getting to his feet. Looking around he saw he was still in the same place, so he didn't know what happened. Was it some type of game jutsu? He looked around and saw that there was nobody around. However, it was then he began to notice his body was changing. He was getting smaller and smaller weight. He wasn't getting shrunk like he thought he was getting younger. 10 minutes later, all that was in the spot where Naruto Uzumaki once stood was a baby with golden orange hair, with blue eyes crying in a bundle of clothes. The babe would soon be found by a grieving couple of royal blood who had lost their newborn son Escanor Pride not even a week ago. However, upon seeing the baby they gasped in shock before they picked up the baby. "Michiel, do you see the baby's parents?" she asked as she looked around. Michiel shook his head. "It appears he's been here for several hours on his own. His parents must not have been able to care for him," he said as he looked at the baby. "He sure does remind me of Escanor," he said softly. The queen felt her eyes widen as an idea came upon her. "Michiel, what if this was a sign that he was meant to be with us? Our first child has already begun to learn how to lead the country, so we could just take him in as our own. We could pass him off as our little Escanor. We never did tell Bartra our child died, nor Simon that Escanor is actually dead," she said hopefully. Michiel smiled softly. "It wouldn't hurt, and if he chooses to serve Bartra like we agreed for our Escanor too, then we will happily support his decision to do so," he said as he gently rubbed his new son's head. "Welcome to the family, our little Escanor," he said happily. "Present." Escanor shook his head before muttering, "Man, if only Ma and Pa could see me now. I wonder what they would say. Tch, knowing Ma, she'd nag my head off going, 'Escanor, you idiot. I told you to watch what you did, but did you listen to your mother? No. You had to go and do something as stupid as kill the Grand Holy Knight, Zaratras.'" Escanor then chuckled and said, "Yeah, I am not looking forward to that one." He then swallowed some of his high-quality Britannia ale. It was actually one of his 12 bottles of 300-year-old Britannia ale that he had bought for himself and his friends from their order of knight known as the 7 Deadly Sins. Too bad he wouldn't be able to share it with them for years to come. Present time, Konoha. It had been nearly 6 months since Naruto up and vanished from Konoha. Minato had been secretly sending out Anbu search teams to see if they could find his son, but unfortunately, not only did they not find hide nor hair of his son. Due to him keeping this a secret, his wife had divorced him and even stated that keeping it a secret from her was stupid as she wouldn't have told anyone. He had tried to mend the bonds between them, but it just wasn't happening. It didn't help that Kushina and Mito moved out to live with her friend, Tsume Inyazuka, who was head of the Inyazuka clan. However, he recently heard a rumor of a man in Britannia by the name of Escanor Pride who had actually met his son, even if only in passing, before parting ways. If these rumors were true, then he would need to find this Escanor before someone else did. He was broken from his thoughts at the sound of someone knocking on his office door, to which he gave the work for them to enter. The blonde leader watched as a group of his ninja entered, including his ex-wife and the twin sister of his missing son. These women consisted of Tsunade Senju, Mito Uzumaki, Kushina Uzumaki, Kushina's friend, Makoto Uchiha, and her sister, Madami Uchiha, his former teammate Hitomi Uchiha, and his former Anbu protector, Hisui Hyuga, Genin Tenten Higurashi, who was in Naruto's class. Anko Mitarashi, Naruto's notorious prankster friend, Hana Inyazuka, Tsume's daughter and a friend who used to watch Naruto as a kid, and finally, Shizune Kato, who was Tsunade's apprentice. Now, Tsunade normally wouldn't have stepped foot in Konoha, but unfortunately, she didn't have much choice in the matter. Minato had sent her a message saying how, if she did not return to Konoha, then she, along with her apprentice, Shizune, would be labeled as rogues, as well as how it was her duty to be there for Kushina and Mito, since she was Mito's godmother. So, with no other choice, the buxom blonde returned home with her apprentice. Tsunade sighed as she looked at her Kage and asked, "Alright Minato, why are we here? I'm sure it has to do with the rumors of the other continent, right?" With the other women nodding their heads, as they also wanted to know what they were doing there. Minato nodded and spoke as he reached into his desk, "As per our agreement with the land of Britannia, we give up information on rogue ninja and the elemental nations." Minato then pulled out some flyers, "They do the same with their warriors turned criminal. It recently came across my desk that a group of 7 of their most deadly warriors have gone rogue after killing their grandmaster several years ago. It's actually quite humorous that they are called the 7 deadly sins." He then spread the flyers out to show they were in fact wanted posters, revealing 6 of the 7. There is also a rumor that one of them knows the location of Naruto, but keeps it to himself. Minato finished, as the women felt their eyes widen in shock. "Nai-san is in Britannia?" Mito asked her father, who nodded his head. Not only that, but according to the rumor, the one who knows his location is said to be the most powerful warrior to have lived in nearly 6 centuries, as none can match his strength. Assuming this rumor to be true, he might be on par with some of us Kage, possibly even Tsunade's granduncle. Minato said. What they didn't know however, was that Escanor had surpassed even Tsunade's own grandfather by nearly twice as much power alone when he fought. The women themselves gulped a bit in fear. Tobirama Senju was a high Kage level ninja and was the 3rd most powerful warrior in his time period after Madara Uchiha and Tsunade's grandfather, Hashirama Senju. If these rumors were true, then they would need to be extremely cautious. Shizune stepped forward and said, "If that is true, then we will need to approach with caution if we ever find him." Minato nodded and said, "Indeed, that is why I am sending all of you to Britannia to track down Escanor and see if you can indeed confirm that he is knowledgeable of Naruto's location." Minato then places down Escanor's wanted poster and says, "This is the man you are looking for, his name is Escanor Pride. Now, I want you all to find him and try to see if he really knows the location of Naruto. I don't care what tactics or methods you have to use, just make sure you don't get yourselves killed, you come back in one piece, and you come back with Naruto. Is that understood?" All the women then replied in unison, "Yes, Hokage-sama." And with that, the group of women began to leave in order to prepare for the journey ahead of them, as they didn't know what they should expect. Little did they know, the journey they were about to embark on would keep them away from Konoha and the elemental nations for quite a number of years. Time skip 3 years. The wonderful country of Britannia, so full of life and wonder that is very different from the war-torn lands of the elemental nations. Along with having different creatures, they have different abilities and military. Instead chakra like the elemental nations uses, the people of Britannia use mana, which allows them to use magic. Instead of having shinobi and kunoichi, the lands of Britannia use soldiers called knights, with an elite class called holy knights. It had been 10 years since the group known as the 7 Deadly Sins betrayed the Kingdom of Lions and killed the great holy knight, Zaratras, before suddenly disappearing. No one has seen or heard anything about any of the 7, and peace had been present for most of the 10 years. However recently, many disturbances have been occurring due to a new threat that is coming to Britannia. These new threats are going to be the catalyst that causes a change in the entirety of the land of Britannia. However, if you want to stop these threats, you would need the strongest, most ruthless people in all of Britannia. You would need the 7 Deadly Sins. Random hill near random village. We currently find ourselves overlooking what appears to be a tavern on the hilltop near a village. However, there was suddenly the sound of armor clanking as it seemed to be moving. The armor from which the sound is coming from is a set of extra large armor that appears to have rusted some as well, meaning movement would have been quite strenuous. As they continued moving, we see that their path was headed straight for the tavern, where a sign could be seen, showing the name of the tavern was called the Boar Hat. "The 7, came a muffled voice from the suit of armor, "must find the 7. Meanwhile, inside the Boar Hat. Inside the tavern, people were having a good time, as they were able to drink a various spread of alcohol, ranging from some finely aged Britannia ale, to even some sake from the elemental nations, which recently opened up to trading. People were having a good time, as they loved the rich taste of sake, but we're getting off point. Focusing on a specific table, we find ourselves a familiar group of women. So, anyone find anything? This question came from a red-headed woman, thought the more correct term would be crimson-haired woman. She had violet eyes, her hair in a ponytail, and wore a black short-sleeved shirt with a red hooded jacket vest that had white fur lining the hood and black form-fitting pants with black shinobi sandals. Strapped to her hip was a sword, or more specifically, a katana with a sheath being solid black with the design of a red Chinese dragon. This was Kushina Uzumaki, mother of Mito Uzumaki and ex-wife of Minato Namikaze. Currently, Kushina was talking to the rest of the Kunoichi who she had come to Britannia with in search of her missing son, Naruto. The Kunoichi looked at each other before one decided to reply with, "Sorry Kushina, but we haven't heard anything about any of the sins, let alone about the specific one we're looking for." The one who replied was a girl who had grey eyes with black hair that was styled into two buns, giving her a sort of panda look, with a few short fringe bangs framing her face. She was wearing a white high-collared blouse, with long sleeves and maroon edges with a pair of maroon puffy hakama-style pants, with bandages wrapped around the exposed part. She was also wearing a pair of black fingerless gloves and low-heeled sandals, with her black forehead protector wrapped around, well, her forehead. This was Tenten Higurashi, she was currently 17 years old and was the former classmate of Naruto. During their time in the academy, the two had been very good friends because she didn't treat him badly like a good portion of the other students. As the two had spent time together, Tenten began to wonder why she would help defend Naruto from the other students. As they grew up together, she slowly began to realize that she was falling in love with him. She remembered how when they were 9 years old, she was made fun of for her hairstyle by others calling her a panda. However, Naruto was the one who would stick up for her and would fight off the bullies. He would then tell her that she shouldn't listen to them because, while her hairstyle did resemble panda ears, it just made her that much cuter. She remembered how she would always blush at that and how he seemed to have this warmth around him during the day that just seemed so relaxing. That was probably when she started getting feelings for Naruto, but she was still too young at the time to realize it. However, girls mature faster than guys, so by the time they were 11, she started showing signs and hadn't realized until shortly before he disappeared that she loved him. She had been ready to let him know her feelings, but when she had finally worked up the courage to let him know her feelings, he had disappeared. Tenten had felt like her whole world had shattered in that instance, as he had been there for as long as she had known him. It was indescribable how much pain and sadness she felt when he had disappeared. That was why, when she heard from her Hokage that someone knew of his location, she had been ecstatic to be a part of the group who were searching for him. However, she was sad that they hadn't found anything about Naruto or of this, Escanor Pride, they were looking for. "Yeah, we've been searching everywhere, from libraries to bars, but nobody has anything about Escanor or Naruto. Sigh, I just can't believe we've been looking for almost 3 years and haven't even heard of a rumor." These were said by a pair of women who looked exactly alike with black hair and onyx eyes. One was wearing a tight black short-sleeved shirt that showed off her E-cup wrists underneath her green flak jacket and a pair of black fingerless gloves. She was also wearing a pair of grey anbu pants with low-heeled sandals and a ninja pouch wrapped behind right hip. The other lady was wearing a light grey no-sleeve kimono blouse that hugged her DD cup bust quite nicely. She was also wearing a pair of black stretch pants that hugged her luscious thighs and tight heart-shaped ass and a pair of grey low-heeled sandals. They both also had black bow staves on their backs. These were Makoto Uchiha and her younger sister, Madami Uchiha, two of the last few Uchiha in the world. They were friends of Kushina and when they heard how her son had disappeared, they were instantly there for her. Makoto couldn't imagine if one of her children had just suddenly disappeared and while Madami couldn't understand since she didn't have any children of her own, she knew that she would be devastated if her sister had ever disappeared. "Don't worry Kushina, if we keep searching, we're bound to find something about either one of them." This came from a gorgeous and buxom blonde with brown eyes and her hair styled into two ponytails with a few bangs framing her face. She had an I-cup bust which was clearly straining against her sleeveless grey kimono blouse that showed off her cleavage and was held closed by a dark bluish grey obi that also matched her pants. She was also wearing a pair black, strapped sandals with high heels with a green haori that had a red circle with the kanji for Gambalai cake in the middle with a necklace that seemed to have a green gem on a leather cord. She also wore red nail polish on her fingernails and toenails with soft pink lipstick. Next to her was a woman with straight shoulder-length jet black hair and onyx eyes. She was wearing a bluish-black kimono with white trimmings held close by a wide obi, though the whole thing strained against her G-cup bust. She wore open-toed low-heeled sandals as well as what appeared to be a mesh clothing underneath her kimono. Something to note about her was the pig that she was carrying in her arms that was wearing a pearl necklace and dark red jacket. These three were Tsunade Senju, last of the Senju clan, Shizune Kato, Tsunade's apprentice and niece of Tsunade's former lover, and finally, Taunton the pig. Tsunade was the godmother of Mito and Naruto, though she hadn't been there for either of them when they were growing up. The reason being because she didn't want anything to do with the village due to her past. You see, Tsunade had lost both her former lover and her younger brother to war and both had wanted to become Hokage of the village. After their deaths, Tsunade gained a fear of blood, as well as grew a type of hatred for Konoha. It was due to this hatred that Tsunade never went back to Konoha, but it also because of her not being there that she couldn't help Kushina take care of Naruto or Mito. When Tsunade finally came back, the first thing she wanted to do was check on Kushina and the kids, however when she got there, she had finally realized the other reason she was called back. She had never seen Kushina look as heartbroken as did, and Tsunade couldn't help but feel guilty, because had she been there, she could have helped Kushina take care of Mito and Naruto. Tsunade probably would have gotten worse with her drinking if it hadn't been for Shizune, reminding her that drinking wouldn't help anybody and would only hurt herself. Tsunade had never been more grateful to Shizune than at that point in time, because if it hadn't been for Shizune, Tsunade would have become nothing more than a useless drunken mess who was full of guilt. Nowadays, Tsunade still loved to drink, but she now knew when it was okay to drink and was in better control of herself. Especially after Shizune, after Kami knows how many years, explained how Tsunade could end up doing things or get taken advantage of when she gets drunk. Tsunade realized that all the years of Shizune telling her to slow down on the drinking or to drink less wasn't because Shizune didn't want her to enjoy herself, it was because she was worried for her. Sigh, I hope we find Ani-chan someday. The one who said this looked to be a carbon copy of Kushina. She had the same crimson hair and violet eyes as Kushina, though her hair was left straight with two small braids framing her face. She wore white long-sleeved kimono blouse with crimson trimmings, held close by a crimson-red obi, showing off her high D-cup wrists. She also wore black Hakama-style pants with black low-heeled sandals with a ninja pouch behind her right hip, while she also had a katana strapped to her left hip. The sheath was blood red in color and had the design of a tree with roots growing out on it in black. This was 16-year-old Mito Uzumaki, younger sister of Naruto Uzumaki, daughter to Kushina Uzumaki and Minato Namikaze, as well as Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Yoko. The day she had come back from the academy, she had been devastated to learn that her brother had disappeared. She and her brother had always been close to each other to the point that they would know if one was hurt, in danger, or even sad. Their mother had always teased her about wanting to be closer than a normal brother and sister, but Mito would always begin vehemently denying it, though the bright blush on her face never helped. Mito couldn't help that she loved her brother more than a sister should, but she just felt drawn to him. When they were growing up, she would always cling to him and absolutely loved the warmth he exuded. He always made her feel so safe, and whenever people would begin glaring at her, he would always be there to chase them off, or if an adult got BP and tried to attack her, he was always to protect her. He never allowed her to get hurt, and whenever someone would come and try to hurt her, he would overpower them before throwing them away. Literally. Her Ani-chan would pick them up and throw them in the trash. She could always count on him to be there for her, whether it was when she had nightmares or when people were mean to her. That was also why, when her brother disappeared, it had been so devastating, because she had believed that he left due to not wanting to protect her anymore or believing she was a burden. It was only thanks to her mother and her brother's classmate, Tenten, who later became her friend as well, confirming that he loved her dearly and protected her because he never wanted to see her hurt. Mito can honestly say that she had never cried as much or as hard as she did at that point in time. Not even when she first heard about her brother disappearing did she cry as much as hearing that he loved her so much. After that, Mito had decided to work her ass off in training in order to be strong enough so that she could earn the right to leave the village and find her brother. However, when she heard about how there was someone who knew where her brother is, she was happy and scared. Happy, because she would finally get to reunite with her brother after being separated. Scared because she didn't know if her brother was still alive and she was afraid if the reason he left was because he saw her as a burden. However, she trusted her mother and Tenten, so she knew there was nothing to worry about and that it was just her fear getting to her. Don't worry Mito, we'll find him someday. Besides, this also gave us the opportunity to train and learn more. One voice said, before another began, yeah. We also got the chance to get some pretty interesting stuff. The first voice came from another of the women in the group. She had long brown hair that was in a ponytail with two strands framing her face and black eyes. She also had a pair of red fang tattoos on her cheeks, as well as a flower tattoo on her upper right arm. She wore a gray brace on her left wrist and bracelets along with bandages on her right wrist. She wore a form-fitting green flak jacket that hugged her DDD cup wrists, which also didn't have any pockets and was unzipped to show off some of her cleavage. She was wearing a pair of gray form-fitting shorts that ended just above her knee and black low-heeled sandals. The second voice came from a woman with short purple hair and light brown, pupilless eyes. She was wearing a form-fitting mesh bodysuit that hugged against her E-cup bust, also showing that she wore no bra and went from her neck to her thighs. Over that, she wore a tan overcoat with a purple seams, a dark orange miniskirt with a dark blue belt and pale gray shin guards that connected with her black sandals. She wore her black forehead protector, a necklace with a snake fang and a wristwatch. These were Hana Inuzuka and Anko Mitarashi, friends of Naruto's. Hana was the daughter of a clan head, and because of that, a lot of people treated her like she is glass. And she hated it. She wasn't some fragile doll or a glass cup. She was a kunoichi, one who worked her way up to the top and trained hard to get where she was. It was getting to the point that she felt like she was suffocating. She was just glad her mother and clan didn't treat her any different. Hana had been feeling especially stressed the day she met Naruto, and she had thought he was going to treat her the same as everyone else, but to her pleasant surprise, he just treated her like everyone else. Of course, he was just a kid as she would babysit him and his sister, but he still didn't seem to care about who she was. He was a breath of fresh air to her as he didn't treat her any different, and she didn't mind. It felt good to have a friend who wanted to hang out with her for who she was, and not for being a clan heir. She had even introduced Anko, her friend and old classmate from her academy days, to Naruto, and the two hit it off. It then became the three of them hanging out and having fun, though it eventually became her babysitting both of them, since they somehow got into pranking together. She knew about Naruto's pranks, I mean who didn't, but when his expertise became combined with her experience as a shinobi, they made a deadly team. Even Anko had taken a liking to the little gaki, brat, as she liked to call him. The two of them would often be found getting scolded by other shinobi or even the Hokage, depending on who caught in the act. If they were caught at all. It was this friendship and the closeness that the three felt that made the two of them glad they were partaking in the search for Naruto. They missed their friend, and Anko especially missed her pranking buddy, as they would have more fun together than when she was hanging out with her friends, Hana, Yugao, and Kurenai. The group kept talking when they were suddenly interrupted by drinks getting placed on their table. They turned to look who it was, and they saw what appeared to be a little boy with messy blonde hair and green eyes, wearing a white button-up shirt, sleeveless, black vest. He was also wearing white pants that stopped at his knees, a loosely worn black tie, and black shoes with no socks. On his back was a brown scabbard for a sword, and the sword handle was in the shape of a green dragon with a ruby for the eye. "Here you go, ladies. You look like you could use them." They all grabbed the cups before taking a sip, and they all liked the taste, except for Mito, who had her drink taken from her by Tsunade. Mito pouted at Tsunade, who only gave her a knowing look before nodding her head towards Kushina. Mito now understood why she still wasn't allowed to drink, despite being considered an adult. But the pout, Mito just unsealed a bottle of water and drank from that. Kushina turned towards the boy and said, "Thank you, young man, but aren't you a little young to be working as a waiter?" The boy turned and said, "Oh, you have got it wrong. I'm not a waiter, I'm the owner, and my name's Meliodas." The group were shocked to see that someone so young was the owner of a tavern, but they couldn't really say much about it, considering they've each seen weirder. The group were about to continue talking until the door was slammed open by a guy who looked like he'd seen a ghost. "I saw it." This got everyone to quiet down and listen as the man sat down and began to tell everyone about the Rust Night. This got reactions of people saying that they were just stories that parents used to tell their children to behave, or else the 7 deadly sins would come and get you in blood-rusted armor. And basically the part in the anime when they are all talking. Suddenly, everyone began to hear a loud metallic thumping sound coming from outside the door to the tavern. Everyone began watching as suddenly the door opened up to reveal a large figure wearing rusted armor walking in, before saying, "The 7." This got all of the men to run out of the bar, leaving only the curious young bar owner and a group of women who all looked surprised to find the person they were searching for suddenly do the exact opposite of what Anko had said earlier. "Hello, would you like something to drink?" asked the young bar owner, getting looks from the kunoichi like he'd grown a second head. "The 7 deadly sins," the knight muttered one more time before falling backwards to the floor, where the helmet fell off revealing the face of a girl with silver hair covering her right eye and an earring hanging from her left ear that had a blue gem with the designs of a sun and moon with stars in it. Later on, we find the group in a room with a young girl laying on a bed and the rusted armor lying in a corner. The young girl was wearing a black skin-tight jumpsuit with black leggings that extend from her mid-thighs to just before her toes, with matching black wraps on her arms covering from her wrists to just before her shoulders. The group, young bar owner and Hawk, had all been surprised, except the bar owner, at seeing such a young girl wearing all of that armor. While they were initially surprised, the group then became protective when they saw the young bar owner try to grope her chest with the excuse of making sure she was okay and alive. This got him thrown out of the room by the group of women before they asked Hawk to get a basin of cold water and a towel. Currently, the girl was resting on the bed with a towel that was soaked in cold water on her forehead, sleeping peacefully while the women were talking about the girl. So, any ideas on why she would be walking around in such a big suit of armor in this heat, clearly for a long time, if the heat stroke she is suffering from says anything? asked Tenten, knowing from her background as a co-owner of a weapons shop that metal armor will build up heat from being in the sun and when it's hot. No idea, but we could ask her when she wakes up. Offered Mito, which got the group nodding in agreement, and maybe she knows something about the 7 deadly sins from what she was saying. Mito mentally added, figuring that the girl must know something. That is very true, and she also seems to have some strange energy coming from her, but I cannot tell what it is. Mito didn't react to the voice in her head because she knew that it was Kurami talking to her from inside the seal, for you see, when Mito was training when she was younger, she used too much chakra at one point and knocked herself out, where she eventually found herself coming face to face with Kurami, who explained that she didn't want to attack Konoha because she actually liked Konoha. If only because it was Mito and Kushina's home, and that she had been forced by an uchiha who called himself Madara. This had shocked Mito, but she decided to trust Kurami and told her mom when she woke up, where they decided to look at the seal and rewrite it so that Kurami could have a body outside, but her power would stay inside the seal and be regulated by Mito. So that she wouldn't die because she was not strong enough to survive having a Biju removed from her seal like her mother was. Okay, I'll keep an eye on her just in case she turns out to be dangerous, replied Mito. Okay kit, informed Kurami. Mito then snapped out of it when she and the rest heard the girl began to stir. She opened her visible eye to show a dazzling blue eye before she looked around curious about her surroundings and was surprised to see the group all either standing or sitting around her. The girl gained a slight flustered look and stuttered, "Hello, there," while waving her hand. "Hello, it's good to see that you're up and feeling better. You gave us quite a scare there when we saw you passed out from heat stroke," informed Hana, having some medical experience even though it was mostly towards animals. The girl looked even more flustered at that, "Sorry about that." She apologized while bowing her head. The group just giggled or chuckled at her antics and told her it was fine and that she didn't have to bow. They soon found out her name is Elizabeth. They then began to talk about what she was doing, wandering around in such big armor in this heat, and she informed them that she was looking for the 7 deadly sins. The group and Hawk were all surprised at hearing that answer. Before they could continue however, there was a loud noise from outside in the main part of the tavern where they heard a bunch of knights saying they serve under some Lord Twigo in search of the Rust Knight who had been spotted in the area. The group came out of the room after telling Elizabeth to stay put and were prepared to defend the girl when they heard the bar owner says that he knew where the Rust Knight was, and then Hawk exclaimed he was the Rust Knight when he came out with random pieces of the rusted armor that Elizabeth had been wearing strapped to his body. Before anyone could do anything, a knight outside began shouting about a woman running into the forest. The knights gave chase to Elizabeth, saying they just had to tire her out before Lord Twigo arrived. As the knights were chasing Elizabeth, they were being attacked by the group and Hawk. This caused the knights to focus on the group and not notice Elizabeth being picked up by 2 people into a tree before the last knight ran off the cliff. In the tree were Elizabeth, Meliodas, and Mito looking down as the knights fell. "So, how does the rest of that story go? Why are you looking for the sins?" asked Meliodas and Mito at the same time, just as the rest of the group began appearing. Elizabeth began explaining that she was looking for the 7 deadly sins in order to stop the Holy Knights. As she was explaining all of the horrible things that the knights did, they were unaware of another presence approaching them. Meliodas began saying how it might not be possible to find the sins because of some rumors that they all died, when Elizabeth exclaimed that they were too amazing in order to die so easily. The group looked at her in surprise when suddenly the ground began shaking. It turned out that the cliff had been sliced clean through and was falling to the ground. Standing on the area where the cliff was sliced, stood a knight with a thick mustache and dark red armor. The knight looked down and said, "Confirmed. 13 unknown people, dead." He then looked behind himself, "Is that alright?" He was asking the 4 knights that were standing behind him. "But Mr. Leone was beneath the cliff," said one of the knights. "Then we can say 14 dead." The knights were shocked at how calmly this knight said that and said, "But Lord Twigo, that's horrible." The now named Twigo turned them and asked, "Then, 18 dead?" "Anything but that," the knights shouted in fear. The 5 knights then heard several sighs of relief and turned to see the group of women with a retarded teenage girl carrying Elizabeth and Meliodas carrying Hawk and Mr. Leone. The 4 knights shouted in surprise and relief, "Mr. Leone." "Twigo, however, what are you all doing alive? Don't change my confirmed death toll." The entire group minus Elizabeth and Mr. Leone all shouted or calmly said, "Don't confirm it on your own." As the group was checking on each other, Twigo saw Elizabeth searing. "Well, it seems I'm in luck. That symbol is of the royal family. Which means you are, confirmed, Princess Elizabeth," he exclaimed, getting shocked looks from the group except for Meliodas. "Princess Elizabeth? As in the princess of the kingdom?" The group and Hawk shouted I surprise, while Meliodas just looked curious. Twigo then said, "There is a search order for you throughout the kingdom. you won't run, will you? The order is for your capture, but nothing can be done if you were killed in an accident." The group began running into the forest, with Elizabeth shouting how she can't be captured and that she won't give up. Twigo then swung his sword in their direction while shouting, "Confirmed. Accidental death." Once he swung, he caused the entire forest to be cut down, but everyone was okay, except for some scratches and dust, with Hawk being the worst with a stick being stabbed into his rump and Meliodas having his left sleeve blown off. Elizabeth was lying on the ground crying about how she was being saved by a group she didn't know and a man whose name she didn't know. Meliodas then smiled and told Elizabeth that his name was Meliodas, causing her to be surprised, and she along with the rest of the group all finally noticed the symbol on his arm. A dragon. Elizabeth stuttered in shock, with the others being surprised as well. As she was saying this, Twigo came up to them and swung his sword down on them, causing a huge cloud of dust to appear. Twigo stood there thinking this time he got the group when suddenly he was hit with a blow of strength, blowing him back. He looked up and everyone was surprised to see Meliodas wielding his broken sword in his left hand. Twigo grew angry at this and began shouting, You plan on fighting me with that trash?" "Trash is just fine," answered Meliodas. Elizabeth then began asking, "Are you really that Meliodas?" Twigo was shocked hearing this. "Meliodas, wait, I remember seeing your face before." "No, if that's the case then why do you not look any different from before?" Meliodas then stood with his sword ready, as if to swing from right to left with his knees bent. "Have you figured out who I am?" Twigo got a look of fear and began shouting, It can't be. "Truly, you are Twigo," then swung with all his strength shouting, "Uaire." Meliodas then swung his sword out and introduced himself, "Seven deadly sins, the dragon sin. Meliodas." Twigo was then hit with all of the power that he used when he swung, sending him flying. The group and Elizabeth all looked at Meliodas in shock as Meliodas just calmly watched Twigo go flying as he said, "Oh. He sure went up high." He then resheathed the broken sword, turned to Elizabeth and said, "Well, looks like you found the first one, Elizabeth. About the remaining 6, I've actually got business with them too, so I've been searching for them as well as of late. I've been using the bar in order to find information about them. If I had a serving girl, then I'd be able to get more customers and more information. You'll come with me, right?" Elizabeth looked shocked at the offer and smiled brightly while exclaiming, "Yes." Actually, a voice said, this earned the attention of Meliodas and Elizabeth, who both turned to see the woman standing looking at Meliodas with serious looks. "We will be coming along as well." Meliodas and Elizabeth both grew confused. "Why?" asked Meliodas. Then Mito stepped forward and said, "Because we have been looking for the sins in order to see if they would help us find someone." Elizabeth then decided to ask, "Who are you looking for?" Kushina answered this time, "We're looking for my son." "Why would we be able to help you?" asked Meliodas with a curious yet serious face. "Because we received information that the man known as Escanor Pride knows the last known location of my son, Naruto," replied Kushina. This caused Meliodas to go wide-eyed as he then answered, "I know that name." Everyone looked at him in surprise. "You know Naruto?" asked the group of Kunoichi. Meliodas nodded his head. "Yeah, Escanor used to talk about the boy who earned his respect all the time. He told us stories that he said were told to him by Naruto." The group grew extremely happy, knowing that they now had a solid lead. "So can we come with you?" asked Tintin. Meliodas just smiled and nodded his head saying, "Sure, I think it'll be fun and amazing to help you guys out." Suddenly, a giant green pig appeared and everyone noticed the boar had on its back along with Hawk, who had ran away earlier. "Nice timing, Hawk's mom," exclaimed Meliodas, and then he and everyone else climbed on Hawk's mom. With this everyone looked forward, all of them ready to continue their journey, Elizabeth and Meliodas to find the other 7 sins, and the group of Kunoichi to look for Naruto, but decided to help Elizabeth along the way. None of them knew what was in store for them, but they all knew one thing, no matter what happens on this journey, it was going to be one hell of an adventure. Meanwhile, undisclosed location. In an undisclosed location, one Escanor Pride sat at his hidden bar waiting for an eventual customer when he heard the door to the My Sweet Gluttony slowly open to reveal a familiar face to him. "Ah, Hendrickson-san, it's so good to see you after all this time," he said happily as he adjusted his magic glasses that suppressed his powers to the bare minimum. It had been a couple of years since he had laid his eyes on his old friend. "Escanor, I see you haven't picked up hardly any customers even after all this time." The silver-haired man joked with a smile as Escanor grasped the man's forearm with his hand as the man did the same, both wearing smiles on their faces. "Yeah, it's hard to be a barkeep when hardly anybody knows the location of the bar," he said, getting a laugh from Hendrickson. "I hear ya on that one, my old friend," he said as he sat down with a tired groan where he rubbed his aching knees. "Man, either I'm getting old or the travel to your bar is just that long," he said with a chuckle as Escanor nodded in agreement. Now you know how I feel when I have to make deliveries to places like Vasil and Britannia, Hendrickson. Escanor said with a calm look as he poured the man a mug of his finest ale. Hendrickson sighed nostalgically, yeah, seems as if the old days were just yesterday. He said with a small smile, Princesses Margaret and Veronica followed after you like lost puppies, trying to catch you training with the boys and Elizabeth following after Meliodas and Zaratras to play with her. And then the bullshit that happened with my brother went down, and now here we are, 10 years later with nothing to show for it. He said as he chugged the alcohol down. Escanor nodded in agreement, yeah, seems so long ago when in truth it was just 10 years ago. I can't even go back to my parents because of the treaty between Britannia and my old home. He said as he placed a bottle back on the shelf before he sat beside the man with his own mug, to the good old days, where all we had to worry about was Meliodas perving on the women's bathhouses with the others before he convinced us to join him and we got our asses kicked royally. He said with a small grin where the two smashed their mugs together. To the good old days, and may they once again come back to us. He said as they chugged the booze down, setting their mugs down with content, sighs. Hendrickson and Escanor wiped their mouths clean before they stood, so, I already know that you never see me without a reason behind my visits, so I'm just gonna explain to you what's going on. He said as Escanor nodded his head to say he could go on, as you already know, Dreyfus has found a couple of demons. One is red and the other is a silverish color, although we assume that is because that is due to it not having been in the sun for however long it's been where it is currently. He said to the man as he brushed his hair back. Yeah, the enhancement project for the new Knights of the Order. You told me this about a year ago when you came by. Escanor nodded his head remembering the topic. Hendrickson nodded his head, right, which you already know is a failure thanks in part to Dave when he went rogue nearly 6 years ago to protect his kids Gila and Zeal from his actions. I assume Gother found him as I can sense his presence, but not the armor's own. He said with crossed arms where Escanor nodded his head in agreement. Anyways, I was ordered by Dreyfus to ingest some of the red demon's blood around a week ago. I barely survived it. He said as Escanor looked shocked by the revelation, and soon, he'll order me to inject a couple drops of the white or silver demon's blood into my body to enhance myself even more, he revealed. What? Are you serious? You know you can't go through with it, Hendrickson. You could die. It's bad enough that you were almost killed with the red demon's blood when you took it, Escanor exclaimed. Hendrickson shook his head. Dreyfus seems to think otherwise. He stated, he seems to believe that with my body already enhanced by the red demon's blood I could survive the injection of the silver-white demon blood into my body. He said, I don't know what'll happen, but if you ever return to the capital and I am in fact possessed by the power-hungry energy of the demon clan, you'll kill me. He said seriously. Escanor shook his head, no, I won't do it. You're one of my oldest friends, we've known each other for years, I won't allow you to succumb to the darkness of the demon's blood. He proclaimed. Hendrickson nodded his head, I know you won't, but I know if it comes down to it, you'll show the world why you are the lion sin of pride. He said as he gave a grin, after all, your pride is the Sunday, he said as he stood up and walked out of the bar. Escanor smirked, don't I know it, Hendrickson. He said before shaking his head, oh brother, this isn't going to end well. He said as he walked to his vault, welp, better get going. It's gonna be a couple weeks before the fight festival in Vasil comes round and I need to get a new brand of Fire Mountain whiskey from Esclasa. He told himself as he began to get his shipment ready to leave in the morning. At the same time, in another undisclosed location. In a room where 9 dark silhouettes stood on a series of stumps that resembled fingers, a man with a set of purple eyes with a ripple pattern spoke, report, Black Zetsu. He ordered. The 9 Tails boy has been located, but it may not seem believable when I tell you that he is no longer a mere boy. Black Zetsu said. Oh, do tell, is he a good boy to have grown strong like Toby? Toby is a good boy. A man wearing an orange spiral mask questioned. No, he has somehow turned into an adult. I assume it was one of his new colleagues that made the transformation or used a special seal to enhance his growth. Black Zetsu said before shivering, however there is something you need to know. He stated. Tell us. If we can't get the chakra from him then we'll go for the sister or even that third option. A woman spoke in a commanding tone. His power, although suppressed to an impressive amount, is still immense. I wager it to match Pain Sama as he is now. I wouldn't cross him if he releases his suppressant to fight. He said in a serious tone. Pain snorted, he can try, but like all others, he cannot stand against the full might of a god. He said arrogantly. He then looked to the rest of his group, go to Britannia and get him and bring him back. I don't care if he is on the verge of death, but as long as his body holds the 9 Tails chakra we can extract it from him into the Jito Mizo. He ordered as the shadows vanished, soon, peace will be in our grasp, Yahiko. He muttered to himself. It was currently the middle of the day right now, and Escanor was humming to himself while he went around his little tavern, wiping the stone tables and cleaning everything up. He knew that putting his tavern in this little hideaway in the gorge was a risky move, but he was glad that it paid off. He still had a steady flow of customers thanks to the signs he put up throughout the gorge. It even allowed him to help people when they get lost in the gorge, since the entrance to his tavern looks over almost the entire gorge, so it makes it easier for people to find their way when they get lost. Escanor sighed as he looked up at the back wall behind his counter, where a gold-colored axe rested in a hole in the wall that was slightly bigger than the axe. The axe had a strange shape to it as it had a small hilt that was wrapped in blue-colored leather. The guard of the hilt was a semicircle with 4 spikes coming out of it. Meanwhile, the head of the axe was very large, with a massive crescent-shaped blade that seemed connected to the staff of the weapon through the angel-designed metal. There were also 2 spear-shaped protrusions coming out of the axe head. This was Divine Axe. Rita, his sacred treasure that he was given along with the others when they became the 7 deadly sins for the Kingdom of Lions. Escanor smiled as he remembered the day he and his fellow sins received their sacred treasures. It had been one of the greatest days of their lives as a group. He remembered all of them, Meliodas, Merlin, Diane, and King with their smiles, Ban with his signature smirk that actually looked happy, and Gother with his face forever in its blank emotion. All of them had partied like no tomorrow on that day from the excitement, and he had never been as thankful for his magical glasses as he was then. Escanor was wearing his regular outfit that consisted of a white long-sleeved dress shirt, green vest, and pants with his red bow tie and brown shoes. He also wore a pair of glasses with round lenses and a grey-colored metal frame, which were a gift from his fellow sin, Merlin, the sin of gluttony. He had told her of his desire to be able to walk around during the day without making people uncomfortable at noon from the heat he gives off, and to better control his powers. Listening to his request, Merlin was able to fashion the glasses he currently wears that are capable of suppressing his overwhelming magic during the day. He had been so happy when he received the glasses that he had given Merlin a big hug that had surprised her and everyone else, since he had been more reserved about his affections. Before he was given the glasses, his power would make his body smaller at night and make him dangerously skinny to the point he looked ill. However, thanks to the glasses, he didn't have to worry about that anymore, since the glasses stopped that, allowing him to remain at his normal height and build. Normally, he's about 5 foot 9 inches tall with a moderate build, not too beefy like his daytime form or extremely scrawny like his nighttime form. He had a good form with his muscles, showing that he did work out and focused on speed and powerful bursts than power, a far cry from his daytime form. Escanor sighed as he said to himself, I can't believe it has already been 10 years since the 3 of us were framed. It was so sudden that none of us knew what to do but to scatter and run. Flashback, 10 years ago, Kingdom of Lions. Why are we being summoned to an old castle, on today of all days? Groaned Meliodas, who was wearing his armor minus his helmet. I was hoping to get in some drinking to celebrate the founding of the kingdom. You've never needed a reason to come back before, said a deep, yet nasally voice. Meliodas smiled and said, yeah, I guess that's true. It sounded like the Grandmaster had something important to discuss with us, said one of the sins who was floating off the ground. Maybe it has something to do with our recent mission involving the Troll Queen. Diane, who was walking without her helmet, said. That is very true, though we must also be prepared for any possible consequences, Escanor said from behind the helmet of his armor. He was wearing his steel armor with his helmet on while carrying a spear that had a jagged spearhead in place of his sacred treasure. After all, while we did handle the Troll Queen, we also caused a huge mess with the Druid altar and its destruction, fair Lady Diane. Diane blushed in embarrassment while she rubbed the back of her head at being called fair lady and for being reminded of the destruction they had caused. She knew that she didn't tend to act very womanly at times, but no matter what, Escanor always seemed to treat her and her fellow holy knights who were women with respect. Though they all did notice that he wasn't trying to seem overly charming or respectful, that was just who he was. They also knew that he didn't notice what he did because he tended to be pretty dense at times. Well, whatever the reason, let's get scolded and then go celebrate, Meliodas said. You already decided we're gonna get dressed down, the knight dressed in all red armor asked, though he didn't make it sound like a question. Meliodas and the big man wearing light green armor opened the doors, only for all of them to gasp in shock at what they found. The room was destroyed with gashes covering the walls and floor, craters all around the floor, and blood splattered everywhere. However, what garnered all of their attention was that in the center of the room was a corpse, but it wasn't just any corpse. They knew the body was of the Grandmaster, who was still speared through and had swords and various spearheads stuck in his still bleeding flesh. Grandmaster? They all heard Meliodas shout in shock. All of them were shocked that someone would go so far as to kill the great holy knight, knowing that killing even one holy knight was equal to treason against the kingdom. They all then heard a commotion outside, and when they looked, they saw every knight in the kingdom surrounding the area they were in. With no other choice, Meliodas ordered them all to flee and that they would all meet back up later. Flashback end. Escanor sighed again as he remembered that day, or at least what he could. So much time passed, and yet, so little communication between himself and the others. He understood the reason for it, but he very much wished he could have talked with them and the royal family. Who knows what kind of trouble Princess Veronica would get into with her blunt attitude. Or how many of the remaining loyal, holy knights were stressing themselves with Elizabeth's curious and adventure-seeking personality. And Princess Margaret? What has she been up to these past 10 years, and is she alright? Oh well, Escanor said to himself, not much I can do about that right now. I'll see them all again, I just know it. For now, I should go get the cart ready so that I can make my way to Britannia village. I'm running low on Britannia ale. But that, Escanor put away his cleaning supplies before going through the vault door on the back wall to get the empty barrels for his order of Britannia ale, a few crates for the bottles, and to also prepare the order of alcohol he needs to deliver for the Vasil Fight Festival. Completely ignoring the spear that was resting against the wall that had a jagged spearhead. Meanwhile in Lyons. Hendrickson tapped his fingers against the table as he waited for his fellow loyal knights to arrive. It was a small bar that people frequented from time to time, so it was normal for a knight to come by every now and then. He couldn't go to his house or the council room in the castle, as there were spies for Dreyfus lurking about. The bar was filled with others and would be loud, so it would be nigh impossible to overhear a conversation unless you were part of it. He would not allow his friends to suffer by that demon's dirty hands anymore. He sat at a table facing the door, so when it opened he could simply motion for them to join and order a drink. They wouldn't be having much, just enough to make it look like they were relaxing and having a drink as friends tended to do. As he is thinking this, the door opened to reveal a grinning Hoser, talking about his current workout with Gilthander, only to be ignored by the lavender-haired beauty and the pink-haired one, while an extremely muscular man just nudged him in the side to shut him up. Which was a good thing, as the pink-haired beauty walked over to Hendrickson's table and sat down with the others, quickly joining her. "You wanted to speak with us, Grandmaster Hendrickson?" Hoser asked through the noise of the bar. The silver-haired man nodded his head. "As you all know, the second-generation Holy Knights are gaining favor in Dreyfus's order. His Majesty seems to have a bad feeling about them, and as you know, if he has a bad feeling then things tend to happen. However, I have heard some interesting rumors from a couple of them," he said. It wasn't exactly the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. Especially with what he was about to tell them, rumor has it that Lord Escanor has been found, or rather his axe has been located. He said. He only found this out because he had been followed on his last visit to the man in his hidden bar under the mountain and had tortured the spy for the information. He didn't like what he had heard either. They had known for roughly 6 months on his location, not that he had been visiting. Escanor could hold his own, but he only held the advantage in broad daylight. He could fight at night, but he was severely weak and he could be beaten. Hoser grinned. "So that's one of them, where are the others?" he asked excitedly. Hendrickson scowled. "Keep your voice down, boy, do you want them to hear us?" He growled and got a muttered apology before he calmed himself with a deep exhale. "Now, I want you to know, the Vasil Fight Fest is coming up in roughly a week or so. I talked to Lord Escanor and found out that he's delivering some alcohol to it to procure some finances. You need to go to this location in the Clouded Valley to get the axe. You need to go into a small gorge to enter the bar, called My Sweet Gluttony. Most likely named after Lady Merlin, as he still has feelings for her despite the fact she hasn't returned them to the man." He then pulled out a map and quickly pointed out the location and marked it so they could easily reach it without trouble. "You need to hurry, there is not much time, and I fear they are setting up an ambush for him," Hendrickson said. "But Grandmaster, the divine axe Rita is the heaviest of all the sacred treasures to have been made. It'll take an army to move that thing, and last I checked only Lord Escanor can move it," Margaret said. Hendrickson nodded his head. "I know, that's why I gathered some volunteers who seek to free the sins from their shackles from Dreyfus and his deeds. These are the ones who served the king himself and they know the truth. They will help you take the axe to Vasil so Lord Escanor can fight and then flee," he told her. "And what of us, we still planned on entering the fights," Hoser said. "Good, that'll be a good cover to relay the message of Dreyfus's ambush to him. Get as close as possible and ensure that you tell him about the attack," Hendrickson said. Veronica cleared her throat. "And what about this?" she asked, pulling out a large purple gem from her jacket. "Where did you get that?" he demanded. "From Grandmaster Dreyfus, he said that it was meant to trap Lord Meliodas, but that doesn't make sense. The only way for this to work would be for him to be some type of demon," she responded. Hendrickson nodded before he looked around and noticed somebody looking at them without taking a drink from their ale. "I see. It seems we will have to finish this discussion another time. The spy is here. I assume he's trying to gather information. We will discuss the rest at a later date. You just worry about getting rid of to Escanor. Now, act as if you are trying to enjoy some quality alcohol," he said as he held his mug up to the Knights of Lions. He cheered, getting more from the younger group as they smashed their own into his, and then they began to act out their enjoyment. A few days later. Escanor sighed as he placed another crate into his wagon. He had finished his journey to the best ale makers in the land and had procured his ware to make it to Vasil just in time for the festival as he usually did every year. However, he was thinking back to the old days. When Meliodas and he would simply lay about looking at the sun and clouds and just the overall time he spent relaxing. Pecking the horse once more, he had just climbed into his wagon when he heard a loud slap ring out, causing him to turn. He felt his eyes widen in shock when he saw a holy knight standing above a lavender-haired young woman with a scowl on his face. "Watch where you're going, lest you make me angrier than I already am," he yelled out at her. He was pissed because the people were no longer afraid of the holy knights, or at least not as much as before. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to run into you, I was trying to go around you when I bumped into you," she responded as she held her cheek in pain. "I don't give a damn what you were doing. Don't you know who I am? I'm Fernando Maddle of the Holy Knights that directly serve Lord Gilthander. So what gives you the right to do what you want?" he demanded as he raised his hand to slap her again. "I said I'm sorry, what more do you want?" she demanded. However, this was the wrong thing to ask as he grabbed her by her hair. "Well, since you ask so nicely," he sneered while looking at her with lust in his eyes as he began to drag her away. However, he didn't get far as a hand latched onto his arm, causing him to go stiff. "Who dares?" he demanded as he whirled around, not expecting much resistance. However, he was instead met with a glare from a pair of cold blue eyes that sent shivers down his spine. He ignored the feeling for now, but would later swear that at that moment, he was being looked at like the prey of a great beast. So, young Master Gil has grown so arrogant that he allows his underlings to do as they please. Now that doesn't sound like anything that honest and kind-hearted little boy I remember would allow, and I don't think the young lady wishes to be touched in the way you are about to, so I suggest you let her go," Escanor growled. "And what's it to you, worm?" the man growled. "Oh, it's really not much, I just don't think the king would like it very much if you were to rape his eldest daughter," Escanor said as he finally got a good look at her. There was no mistake, the necklace she wore was one he had given to her roughly before he had been forced into exile. It was an emblem of the sun, with the letter M carved into it. The knight felt his heart stop when he heard those words. "That's not possible, the princess would never step out of the castle without an armed escort," he yelled. "Oh, give it a rest will you," Escanor growled as he kicked the man in the nuts. "You need to get over yourself and learn some manners on how to treat a woman," he said before he slammed his fist into his face and loosed several teeth from the man's mouth as he knocked him out. "And you also need to learn that you are not above the law either," he spoke before turning to Margaret. "It's been quite some time, milady," he said with a bow, "and it is truly an honor to see how beautiful you've turned out to be." "The Escanor you came," she said with tears in her eyes. Margaret had indeed grown into quite the beauty, with her slightly wavy, indigo hair and her brown eyes. She was currently wearing a blue blouse that hugged her DD cup wrists, with a brown skirt and shoes with white stockings. Escanor chuckled as he said, "I told you didn't I, that I would always be there when you needed me most." He then gave a slight laugh when she launched herself into his chest, forcing him to wrap his arms around her. "Well, not that I don't appreciate the gesture, I think you need to return to what you were doing. It wouldn't be proper for a woman of your stature to be found with a wanted criminal now," Naruto said, only for Margaret to start crying. "No. I can't do that, not after what that man nearly did to me, just let me hold on to you for a bit to calm myself. Please," she requested. Escanor sighed as he slowly wrapped his arms around her. "I guess I could give you a hug to help you calm down a bit," he told her. They stood there for a few minutes before she had managed to calm down enough for them to start moving. Escanor didn't want to leave her alone anymore, so he had suggested that she instead travel with him until they were either closer to the castle or until they found a group of holy knights who they both trusted. As they walked around Britannia village, they had discovered that there had been a group that passed through here and were responsible for returning the water after removing a sword from the ground. Apparently, the group had consisted of a large group of women, 2 pigs, and a little, blonde-haired boy, and it was the boy who had pulled out the sword. This had surprised the two as they had never heard about anyone being strong enough to pull out a sword that was magically enhanced by a holy knight. However, Escanor's eyes narrowed when he heard of one of the women stopping a spear by catching it with an arm that had been wrapped in chains. Chains that came out of the young woman's back and gave off a type of energy. If his hunch was correct, then who else was here and what were they doing here? Margaret must have sensed something was wrong with Escanor because she asked, "Escanor, are you okay?" Escanor looked at Margaret from the corner of his eye and saw her worried look and sighed as he thought, of course she's worried. "I haven't said anything since we left Britannia village." Which was true, the two had left Britannia village almost an hour ago and were currently on the road to Vasil for their annual fight festival. Escanor went there every year to procure business and enjoy watching the contestants fight each other. He had almost signed up 1 year until he remembered that if his glasses ever fell off while he was fighting, then he would most likely cause a lot of damage and a lot of injuries. Escanor looked at Margaret and gave her a small smile as he said, "It is nothing, milady. Just the story about this strange group of people passing through here caught my attention and made me remember something from my past. I used to know someone with the same abilities that were described to us, however it has been many years since I last saw them, so there is no possible way that it is who I am thinking of." Margaret gave him a sad smile as she leaned on his shoulder and said, "So, you miss the people you knew from your home?" She felt Escanor give a slight nod in agreement as she then said, "If you and the others were pardoned, would you go back?" Escanor was able to hear the sadness and fear in her voice, and he had an idea as to why that is. "You're afraid that if I and the others are pardoned, that I'll choose to go back to my old home, aren't you?" Escanor asked. Margaret squeezed the arm she was holding a little tighter as she nodded her head and replied, "Yes, I'm afraid. It's just that you became an important part of the kingdom and my family. I don't want you to leave the kingdom, your friends, or me." She muttered the last part, but Escanor was still able to hear her. Escanor turned towards her and lifted her chin so she could look at him, so she could see the warm smile on his face. Escanor then said, "I understand that you are afraid. If our positions were reversed, I would also feel afraid at losing someone precious to me." Margaret blushed at this, as she remembered Escanor talk about how he would protect his precious people. "However, your fears are unwarranted," Escanor said, getting Margaret to look at him with curiosity. He then smiled and continued, "Well, I would be incredibly happy to finally be able to return home. It has been so many years that everyone has probably forgotten about me. And even if they haven't, I doubt that they would even recognize who I am since I've changed so much." Margaret looked sad at this as she now realized Escanor wouldn't leave because he, himself, was afraid of returning home. Her attention was drawn back to Escanor when he said, "However, despite my fears, those aren't the reasons I wouldn't return home." Seeing Margaret's confused face, Escanor said, "I wouldn't return home because everything I could ever want is here. The other sins, the kingdom, you, I wouldn't go back because there's no need for me to go back." Margaret was shocked at Escanor's words, as this would probably be the closest to a confession she would hear. However, she knew that this wasn't a confession, but she was content for now. With a smile, Margaret gently held Escanor's arm and laid her head on his shoulder. Besides, he didn't mind. After all, why would he be bothered to be the shoulder one of his precious people can lean on? Meanwhile, it had been a few days since Meliodas, Elizabeth and everyone else left Britannia village and given them back their water. Right now the group was walking through a forest that was filled with dead trees and thick mist. During the time they had spent in Britannia village, Elizabeth, Tenten, Anko, and Mito all worked as serving girls, which got them some information about holy nights, avoiding a place called the Forest of White Dreams. They had been curious about this rumor as, if even the holy knights weren't going there, then it was worth checking out. Elizabeth then began climbing up some roots with the of Mito and said, "It's been almost 3 hours since we entered the forest, but I haven't seen a single person or animal. I only see trees and their dead branches, and I'm getting sick of it." "Oink," said Hawk. "Could one of the 7 really be here, Meliodas?" asked Elizabeth. Before he could answer, Kushina beat him to it. "It is possible, Elizabeth, after all, with all of this fog and the vastness of it, this could be the best place to hide." "That may be true, but I heard rumors of monsters living here." "Oink," said Hawk, while being slightly scared. Anna came up to Hawk and began to rub his head while saying, "It's okay, Hawk, nothing is going to get you while we're here to help." This got Hawk to calm down, at least until he heard Elizabeth scream. This got the group to grip their weapons, with some pulling out kunai and Mito, Satsuki, and Kushina pulling out their swords, ready for a fight. Until they turned around and saw Meliodas groping Elizabeth's butt, which promptly got him smacks from the kunoichi. Meliodas then began talking, despite the numerous lumps on his head from the kunoichi, about how because the forest is covered by the fog all year round, that traveling by horse would be difficult and that it would be easy to lose your sense of direction, and how even hunters avoid this forest, thus making it an ideal hiding spot from the holy knights. Suddenly, Elizabeth realized something was different about herself right now. This caused her to wonder what happened, which did not go unnoticed by the others. Mito then asked Elizabeth if she was alright, which got Elizabeth to blush like crazy and reply that she was fine. Her response was met with some suspicion but was otherwise ignored. "Hey, you guys. Hurry up already. Don't you know that monsters always attack when people are messing around?" exclaimed Hawk. "Calm down, Hawk," said Meliodas, "no one likes a paranoid piglet." "Who a paranoid piglet?" came the reply of multiple voices at the same time, which got the group to turn and see that there were now multiple Hawks. The group was surprised to see something like this. Elizabeth asked if this was the work of the monster in the forest, and Meliodas simply said that Hawk must have been right about a monster and that it was pretty crazy. All of the hawks began to ask the group for help, while also saying that they each were fakes before telling the group to do something. While the group was trying to think about what to do, Meliodas solved everything. By beating up every single hawk there. The group looked surprised at the sudden bout of violence, with Elizabeth shouting in worry for Hawk. Then all of the hawks ran behind Elizabeth while complaining about how even Hawk's mother doesn't hit him. Elizabeth got worried about Hawk and turned around to make sure he was okay, but when she turned around, she came face to face with a copy of herself. Suddenly, more and more copies came out. Before there were several copies of Elizabeth all saying they were the real one, but the group just couldn't figure out which was the real one. The Elizabeth copies then moved forward and tried to attack the group, but the Kunoichi and Meliodas all disappeared and then reappeared by the Elizabeths. Meliodas then told the Elizabeths that they had to listen to everything he said. He took advantage of this and had all of the Elizabeths grope their priests after getting them to say his name with an embarrassed and put their right hand up with their left hand on their cheek. When the Kunoichi saw this, they all smacked him upside the head with their fists or their weapons that were still in their sheaths. Meliodas then said, with several lumps on his head, "This is the last test, jump as high as you can." The Kunoichi were confused at this request until they saw all of the Elizabeths jump except for one, who crouched down to the floor while holding down her skirt, with a bright blush on her face. Meliodas then charged forward at a rapid pace and attacked all of the Elizabeths that were in the air, who then fell to the ground and exploded into a plume of smoke. Once the smoke cleared, it revealed a bunch of small, ugly creatures with blue skin and warts, while wearing cloaks to cover their bodies and boots, who were all running away, deeper into the forest. "What were those things?" exclaimed Mito, with the other Kunoichi wondering the same thing. "Those were prankster imps known as hide and seeks," informed Hawk. They began to chase after them when Meliodas said to do so, but then also smacked him again when he revealed that he had taken Elizabeth's panties. As the group was chasing them, they saw the imps running to what looked like a little girl who was curled up, sleeping. This got the group to begin running faster, thinking the imps were going to attack the girl. At least until they got closer and saw that the little girl wasn't so little. She looked to be 30 feet tall, had brown hair that was tied up in twin tails, and a well-endowed curvaceous body. She was wearing a short-sleeved one-piece orange jumpsuit, matching colored boots with 5 crossed laces that reach up to her knees, and 2 fingerless gauntlets of a blue-gray leathery material covered in shiny steel studs. The final thing that the group noticed was the serpent symbol that was on her left thigh. The group then noticed the imps go up to the sleeping girl and say, "Lo Lord Diane. We've allowed a group of holy knights to come through. Please forgive us." At this, the newly named Diane's eyes snapped open, she stood up, and before the group could do anything, Meliodas and Mito were snatched up in her hands with her wondering, "Holy knights. Hey giant woman, are you going to eat Meliodas and Mito?" exclaimed Hawk. "Please let Sir Meliodas and Mito go," exclaimed Elizabeth. "May I ask that you let my daughter go, please?" asked Kushina, while readying her weapon along with the other Kunoichi, who were ready to attack at a moment's notice. Diane looked at the two in her hands before focusing on Meliodas and squinted her eyes in focus while wondering out loud, "Meliodas?" Meliodas simply said, "Hey Diane. How have you been these past 10 years?" Diane stared at Meliodas in concentration for a second before she grew extremely happy and exclaimed, "Captain." Happy at seeing her captain again after 10 years. Hawk, Elizabeth, and the rest of the group were surprised to find out that this was Diane of the 7 deadly sins, with Hawk exclaiming, Diane, you mean this giant is one of the 7, the sin of envy, Diane." Diane looked and saw Hawk and thought that Meliodas brought her food because she loved whole roasted pig, but that was fervently declined. Diane then looked over towards Mito and asked, "So who are you?" Mito then introduced herself, "Hello, my name is Mito, and me and my fellow Kunoichi along with Elizabeth there are traveling with Meliodas to find the 7 deadly sins." Diane then put them both down and asked, "Really? Why would you be looking for us?" Elizabeth then answered, "I am looking for the 7 because I wish for their help in stopping the holy knights." Diane nodded her head in understanding before looking over to the Kunoichi group, who had finally relaxed after Mito was released, and asked, "So, what about you guys? Why are you looking for us?" Kushina answered and said, "We aren't looking for all of you per se, but more the sin of pride, Escanor." "Okay, but why are you looking for him?" asked Diane, with Meliodas answering. "Remember all those stories that Escanor used to tell us that he was told by this person named Naruto?" he asked, getting a nod from Diane at her remembering. "Well, it turns out he ran away and vanished from their village. However, because of the pact the kingdom has with their homeland, even if Escanor wanted to help, he wouldn't be able to because their homeland would have to honor the pact and try to send him back here." "Oh yeah?" exclaimed Diane, "I remember those stories. I always loved listening to those stories." Diane then asked, "What did your son look like and why did he run away?" Kushina described what Naruto looked like before she went on to explain about how the Kyuubi attacked the village with her ex-husband sealing it into Naruto and Mito. She then went on to explain how Naruto would be bullied and treated differently, and then how when he first disappeared, her ex-husband didn't let her know that he had been secretly sending out search teams. During the explanation, Diane looked upset at the villagers for treating Naruto like that and sad at what happened. And then, when we first heard about Escanor knowing his last location, we came and searched whilst training my daughter for the past 3 years to get stronger, since she hadn't been as strong as the rest of us. From there, we looked around and tried to gather information on the seven, Escanor or Naruto, until we ended up at Meliodas' bar, where we ran into Elizabeth and found out Meliodas was one of the seven when defending Elizabeth from a Holy Knight apprentice. From there, we helped Britannia village where we got information about a forest that the Holy Knights avoid, and the rest is history. Kushina finished, getting Diane to look at the kunoichi in admiration at all that they could do, as during the explanation, they each gave brief descriptions of what they could. "Wow!" exclaimed Diane with stars in her eyes, "you guys sound amazing for humans." This got the kunoichi to chuckle, giggle, and laugh, along with Elizabeth, at seeing such a big girl act like such a little kid. Meliodas then decided to say, "Hey Diane, about what happened 10 years ago." Diane caught on and asked, "The day we were summoned by the great Holy Knight, right?" Meliodas nodded before saying, "I have almost no memory from that day." This got not only Diane, but the entire group to be surprised at someone not remembering anything. Meliodas then goes on to explain what he remembers that day up until he doesn't anymore. And exactly the same as in the anime and manga. "When I woke up, I was in a hole somewhere. That's actually where I met Hawk," Meliodas said. "Do you think one of the seven is a traitor and framed us for the murder of the great Holy Knight?" asked Diane. "I dunno, that's why I'm looking for them, to try and find out what happened. However, if anything, Merlin or Escanor would know what happened, since Merlin never was one to allow someone to get the drop on her. Plus, she held a soft spot for Escanor, so she would be sure to help him with that day." Diane nodded her head agreeing with Meliodas about Merlin and Escanor. Then she lightly blushed remembering Escanor and how kind and respectful he was to her. "Alright. The serpent sin of envy, Diane, will lend you my strength," exclaimed Diane. This got the group to exclaim in happiness and joy at getting another sin to help them along the journey. However, before they could begin moving out of the forest, they all heard Hawk exclaim, "Guys! Look up." The group looked up to see a massive thunder cloud when suddenly, several bolts of lightning came down and wrapped around everyone, paralyzing them in place. Then they heard someone stepping into the clearing with them, and when they looked they saw Gilthander, who said, "So you are alive, Meliodas." The group were all looking calm, except for Hawk and Elizabeth, who were struggling against their bonds, and Elizabeth exclaimed, "Gilthander, what are you doing here?" "Gilthander?" wondered Meliodas. "He's the Holy Knight Gilthander. He's a Holy Knight that's very close to the king my father," Elizabeth exclaimed. "Gilthander?" Meliodas wondered again, "Where have I heard that name from? He always took care of me like a real little sister, he's like a big brother to me," exclaimed Elizabeth. Then Mito decided to ask, "Hey, this lightning, the sealed river in Britannia, and the attempt to wipe it out, that was all you, right?" "Mito? That's a terrible thing to say. He's not the kind of person who would do such a." Elizabeth shouted at Mito before she saw Gilthander's face and grew scared when she saw the evil look he had and the feeling of malice he exuded. "This is the same feeling from Britannia, it's a lie, right? You can't be," she exclaimed with fear in her voice. "Elizabeth," Gilthander began, "the kingdom's top priority is to ensure your safety. But that's got nothing to do with me. Whether you live or die is like a grain of sand in the path to the Holy Knight's rule." Gilthander explained before, with a wave of his hand, he released the electric bindings on Elizabeth. "Leave. I only have business with the sins and the one who threw my spear back at me." The kunoichi tensed until Elizabeth then moved in front of the two sins, the kunoichi and Hawk stating, "I won't let you lay a hand on them. Release your spell and let them go." This got everyone to look at Elizabeth in shock at her bravery before Hawk toppled over. "I'm finished." Elizabeth ran over to Hawk and crouched down and said, "Hang on, Hawk." Before he was kicked away with a loud eink. By Gilthander. The group was shocked by this before Meliodas had a blade with a rounded end at his neck being held by Gilthander, who was behind him. Gilthander then asked Meliodas, "Do you know why we're after your heads?" "I dunno," was all Meliodas said. "Some say it's because the Holy Knights want to purge the traitorous knights who tried to overthrow the kingdom." Gilthander said, "While others are looking to increase their prestige and prove their strength by fighting the legendary seven." "Oh yeah?" exclaimed Mito, "and which might you be?" Gilthander simply said, "Both." Then he explained, "Revenge for the death of my father, the great Holy Knight Zarathras, who was called the strongest Holy Knight. And, by killing the seven, I can prove I am stronger and surpassed my father." Meliodas then exclaimed, now I remember. Your little Gil. The little kid who always followed us around, saying he wanted to be just like us. All with a smile. Then Meliodas exclaimed, you sure have grown. Escanor would be very excited to see how much you've grown. Gilthander then appeared in front of Meliodas and said, that was in the past. I am now stronger than any of you since. Maybe, said Meliodas, but you don't know for sure. Gilthander thought for a second, then I will release you and we'll see. Gilthander said, getting ready to release the spell. Meliodas simply said, don't worry about it. And with that Meliodas and Diane simply spread their arms open a bit, and when they looked at the Kunoichi, they saw them be covered in smoke before revealing logs in their places, and then they came out from the shadows of the trees. This got Diane to look at them with stars in her eyes again and exclaim, cool. Getting the Kunoichi to chuckle at her reaction before she turned back to Gilthander with a calm face and waited with her hands on her hips. Meliodas and the Kunoichi were stretching, seeing as they were bound for a good few minutes, and Meliodas said, I could have broken out of there whenever I wanted if I felt like it. I could wipe out you and this entire forest if I felt like it, Gilthander said. I doubt it. That's impossible. Meliodas said with a cheeky grin. Gilthander paused before saying, then I'll kill you. Right back at ya, Meliodas responded. Gilthander then looked to the Kunoichi and said, when I am done with him, I will find out which of you threw my spear back. Doubt it. Said Anko, getting the Kunoichi to chuckle again, besides, I'm pretty sure you won't beat him anyways. Gilthander then heard Meliodas say, Diane, don't interfere. With Diane replying, okay captain. They both got ready with Gilthander putting his left foot forward and sword ready to strike, and Meliodas put his right foot forward right next to Gilthander with his arms relaxed. Gilthander asked, too embarrassed to lose a fight, even if it's 2 against 1? Meliodas simply replied, don't you get it? I'm trying to be polite. Gilthander then brought his sword down and struck using a huge amount of lightning before he noticed it be countered and sent back at him by Meliodas' ability, full counter. Didn't I say? Asked Meliodas, right back at you. Gilthander then appeared behind Meliodas, showing he dodged a rebounded lightning and said, didn't I say? He then slashed Meliodas' shoulder and continued, I'll kill you. Diane simply looked on with slight worry now visible along with the Kunoichi and Elizabeth when Meliodas was struck and began falling to the ground. After he hit the ground, Gilthander looked down at him and said, Meliodas, the dragon sin of wrath, any last words? Meliodas then weakly began speaking, the other 7, the rest of our group, I wanted to know where they are. Gilthander obliges Meliodas and says, very well. Of the remaining 5, we don't know the whereabouts of 3, but we already know where the other 2 are. Gilthander said before continuing, the fox sin of greed is imprisoned his base dungeon, and the grizzly sin of sloth perished in the capital of the dead. Gilthander revealed. Meliodas continued to lie on the ground for a little longer, looking weak and about to die, before he snapped his eyes open and exclaimed, thanks. With a smile. Meliodas then jumped to his feet and mused over the information out loud while still crouching, so, the fox is in base dungeon, and the grizzly is in the capital of the dead. He then stood up and said, thanks little Gil. I'll make sure to pay them a visit. Gilthander then understood what Meliodas did, I see. You purposely allowed yourself to get hurt and feigned weakness to find out about the others. Yup. So, we'll have to continue this another time, alright? Meliodas said. Gilthander then said, as if, I let you go. And attempted to strike Meliodas but was wrapped in glowing purple chains. He looked back and saw one of the Kunoichi with red hair holding him with the chains coming out of her back. He checked the chains and remembered the purple energy on the spear and asked, so, you're the one who threw my spear back? That's right. Exclaimed Mito. Gilthander tried to get out of the chains using his magic, but it didn't appear, which surprised him until Mito said, there's no point in trying to break free or use your magic, as these chains seal it away, as long as you're wrapped in them. Mito then tossed him up and yelled, batter up. Which got Diane to pick up a tree and hold it over her shoulder before she swung at Gilthander, launching him into the air, when Gilthander channeled his lightning magic through the tree to Diane in an effort to damage her, but did nothing except destroy her gloves along with the tree. At this time, Hawk came running back with scratches and burns, shouting about how he was going to beat up Gilthander until he realized that Gilthander was gone. Elizabeth then asked, Sir Meliodas, what about your wound? Meliodas shrugged it off and said, it's no big deal. However, before he could begin moving, he was hit with some senbon needles in the left arm and left leg before Meliodas simply fell over. Diane, Elizabeth and Hawk were surprised by this and looked towards the rest of their group and saw Hinata with veins slowing retreating, showing she had just used her Byakugan and was handing Tenten the rest of the senbon needle she threw. Diane got mad and shouted, what are you doing? Why would you attack the captain? With Elizabeth wondering the same thing. Because he was injured and it was necessary, said Shizune while moving towards Meliodas, with her hands taking something from her ninja pouches before she was grabbed by Diane, who was glaring at her and slightly squeezing her, causing her some pain, which got her to twitch. The rest of the kunoichi got their weapons ready and tensed. Bakoto then shouted, "Let her go." Diane looked at her and said, "No, she was going to kill the captain, and you guys attacked him. So, why should I do as you say?" "Because he isn't dead, just temporarily paralyzed so that he can be treated," shouted Tsunade, getting Diane to look at Meliodas who was still awake and said, "Yeah, I'm fine Diane. I just can't move right now." Diane then opened her hand and saw that Shizune had some bandages, string, needles and medicine to clean, stitch and wrap the wound. This got Diane to look sheepish and put her down before apologizing, "Sorry about that. It's just that the way you said that and the sudden attack made me think you guys were enemies who had been pretending to be allies." The kunoichi relaxed and put away their weapons before smiling with Kushina replying, "It's okay. We understand, it's just that we have a lot of knuckle-headed people in our village and my son used to be the same, where he would receive a wound but wouldn't treat it until he passed out after completing the mission or when there was a big enough break and we had to treat him." This got the group to smile at the times Naruto would act tough but then pass out from blood loss after the mission was completed. The Sins, however, looked surprised at how tenacious someone could be. This also got them thinking about Escanor and how he would act like that at night during his weakest. The group is now back on the road, with a patched-up Meliodas currently riding Diane's shoulder, holding up bands and King's Wanted posters, while saying, "The Fox's Sin was thrown into a dungeon, and the Grizzly's Sin is presumed dead and buried. What do you think, Diane?" "Well, if it is true that King is dead, then I say we check it out after getting ban. Because there would be no point in going to the capital of the dead, completely passing base dungeon, which by the way is closer, and then finding out the rumor was true, and before needing to head back to base, wasting more time to find the others," Diane said with a slight shrug to not throw off Meliodas and not jolt him too much to irritate his bandaged wound. "It will also be best to head to the village first as that way, Lady Tsunade, and I can properly finish dealing with that wound," said Shizune, who was confident in her and Lady Tsunade's skills as medic nin, but they would prefer a proper place where they wouldn't have to worry about getting attacked due to being out in the open. Everyone agreed, and with that, they all began to make their way out of the forest and towards base dungeon. So this part ends here. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, so quickly like this video for second part of this series. And comment down below your thoughts about this series. And now it's time for me to go, bye.